Let's get political. This is the first hearing of the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act. I clipped these key moments just to keep boxing fans up to date. I'll add my opinions throughout.
First, there are some genuinely promising provisions in the Revival Act. For example, a national $150 per round minimum payment would lessen financial strain on boxers who are still finding their footing in the sport. The bill would also set a national $25,000 floor for insurance coverage that the PPSA currently requires for every fight.
Shout out to Representative Omar, who says she's a boxing fan. Those two provisions I'm completely for. I don't think you'll find many that are against a per round minimum of $150 and $25,000 in medical insurance coverage for fighters on the cards. But
unfortunately, there are sections of the Revival Act that raise serious questions about who will actually control the future of boxing. It would remove guardrails that prevent influential promoters from controlling the industry and forcing boxers into contracts that they do not benefit from. This legislation could also allow major corporations to completely take over the sport, leaving boxers without the leverage or the ability to advocate for themselves and their physical and financial health. These provisions prioritize Goliath to the detriment of David.
If the UBO controls the belt, the ranking, the matchmaking, the fighters, activity rate, and the purse, it goes against a couple of the main tenets of the existing Ali Act that forbids conflicts of interest.
Boxers who put their bodies on the line deserve to fight in an industry that pays them well, values their health and safety, and does not make them vulnerable to economic exploitation. While not entirely harmful, this bill, as crafted, gives more power to promoters and big corporations than to boxers. This is why many professional boxers are speaking out against it, including Evander Holyfield, Askar De La Hoya, Clarissa Shields, Jake Paul, and Nico Ali Walsh. I'm not here to reflectively support or oppose HR 4624. I'm here to ask important questions to everyone involved, the promoters, the regulators, and especially the corporations that stand to gain the most. Because we have to make sure that any revival of boxing does not come at the expense of the very athletes we say we are here to protect.
That was a small and powerful list of legends and current fighters who are all against the bill. I've yet to hear a fighter that has involved themselves or spoke extensively about this proposed bill that was for it, but perhaps there are some out there.
I want this hearing to be the start of a longer, serious, bipartisan conversation about how we support our boxers and bring investment into a sport without sacrificing the necessary anti-monopoly firewalls that prevent American boxers from being exploited by powerful corporate actors and foreign investors. I look forward to our discussion today, and I yield.
As a boxing fan, Representative Omar, it seems like she's done her due diligence and actually asked the athletes what they think, as opposed to just relying on suits in meeting rooms or at this hearing.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. Why am I here today is a question. I've been involved in all of the boxing reform movements since the original Boxing Health and Safety Act. Very involved, to the extent of working with the staff of John McCain in both acts to help draft them. Now, I'm going to be the minority here. I am glad that Congress is taking a new look, because there are things that should be corrected and modified. But this act is not the way to go. What the real purpose of this act is, in addition to the things that Lonnie Ali said, they're all good. And I'm all in favor of that. I have them down on my little pad here, is to give a monopoly power, or attempt to give a monopoly power, to a particular UBO, which is Zuffa.
My guy, Mr. English, wants all the smoke. He said, let's stop the cap and let it be known why we're really here. While I wish they were there for national fighter safety and pay, that's definitely not the case.
Most boxers who, through their organizations and individually, are opposed to this act. Nobody, to my knowledge, has gathered them together to speak as they have before the ABC, before the California Athletic Commission, and many other places. When it became known that I was going to testify today, I was deluged with folks that said, make sure they ask this, make sure they ask that. Well, it's not my role, nor do I have the time to do that. But let me tell you really quickly how the other acts that I've mentioned were generated. There was no one who was a lobbyist who was involved in those acts. There were a group, including John McCain, of people who cared and wanted to help a sport that needed help. So they worked collectively together in a long series of hearings. Sadly, it took years, but it got better. The Muhammad Ali Act, as an example, broke to some extent, not to the extent I would like, a grip of ratings organizations in a way that was very bad. Corrupt is the word that I would choose to use. This bill, unfortunately, takes away some of the guidelines that were so important, particularly in the Muhammad Ali Act. For instance, I have provided written testimony, but just certain things. The firewall provision will not apply to the UBO.
Key aspects of the firewall provision include prohibition of dual rules. It is unlawful for a person to act as both a promoter and a manager for the same boxer. Number 2, no indirect interest. The act also forbids promoters from having an indirect financial interest in the management of a boxer, and similarly, a manager cannot have an interest in the promotion of a boxer outside of the compensation specified in their direct contract with the athlete. Number 3, scope. The firewall specifically applies to professional boxing matches scheduled for 10 rounds or more. Number 4, separation from sanctioning bodies. The act also mandates a separation between promoters and the sanctioning organizations that rank boxers and award championships to ensure the objectivity and integrity of the sport's rankings.
That's not helpful to anyone except somebody who wants to control. The next thing of many is that it does not require that positive drug tests be reported as they are now.
Uh-oh.
Right now, they are reported to the local commission, they're reported to the ABC, and of course, through the ABC, to the organization that reports results. It's called BoxRec, and it has a contract with the ABC. This bill says, or it goes to those, or the UBO.
So basically, he's saying it would be at the UBO's discretion whether failed drug tests are reported. We definitely need clarity on who is guaranteed access to that information.
That's wrong. There has been lots of suspect that results have been held, not reported, or manipulated. That can't be. It is a formula for a problem.
A huge problem. UBOs shouldn't have the discretion to keep drug tests under the rug.
My name is Andy Foster, and I serve as Executive Officer of the California State Athletic Commission and multiple leadership positions within the Association of Boxing Commissions. I was also a professional fighter.
That's a thick accent for the California State Commission.
Thank you for holding this important hearing for consideration of the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act. Members of Congress, in 44 states right now, a professional boxer can fight 4, 6, or sometimes 8 rounds, get knocked unconscious, concussed, need stitches, suffered a broken orbital, or worse, and the check they're handed at the end of the night is literally $1.
That's a fact. It's a dollar contract. What the promoter would do was hand fighters the tickets for the fighter to sell the tickets to get paid.
I've stood ringside and watched it happen. In some cases, fighters actually pay the promoter a fee just to be on the card. So they leave the venue worse off, both financially and physically, than when they arrived. Members of Congress, that's not a sport. That's sanctioned exploitation.
Debatable, but I get his point.
In 2016, California said no more. The commission banned $1 contracts and set a minimum purse of $100 per scheduled round. In 2023, Governor Gavin Newsom signed legislation that the commission sponsored that doubled purses to a minimum of $200 per round, the highest in the country. A 4-round fighter in California now walks away with at least $800. It's still modest money, but for the thousands of club-level fighters who keep this sport alive, it's enough money to get you home.
Yeah, to get you home, but hopefully that $800 is also combined with the ticket sales I already mentioned.
H.R. 4624 would finally bring the rest of America to a reasonable floor, $150 per round, meaning $600 for a 4-rounder. That single provision would be the biggest pay raise the working class boxer has ever seen.
Again, hopefully that $600 is combined with the fighter selling tickets.
But money's only part of the picture. Boxing injuries can be brutal and expensive. Too many promoters today carry $5,000 or $10,000 insurance policies. When a fighter needs an overnight hospital stay, an MRI, emergency surgery, those bills go unpaid and often get sent to the fighter himself. This bill fixes that by requiring every professional card in the country to carry at least $25,000 in no deductible medical coverage paid for by the promoter and not the athlete.
I don't think very many people would be against this.
The legislation also establishes the first federal medical baseline, an annual physical, dilated eye exam, and blood testing for hepatitis B, C, and HIV. California and a handful of other states already greatly exceed these standards, and the bill wisely lets us continue to do so. But no boxer in any state will again be cleared with just a quick blood pressure check and a handshake.
Again, not a lot of people would be against these changes.
The California State Athletic Commission voted unanimously to support this bill, and we particularly urge you to add one amendment that we've requested: an automatic inflation adjustment so that these person insurance minimums, these protections, don't erode over time.
Of course, you'll need to adjust for inflation.
We also strongly back the Unified Boxing Organization framework in the bill.
Finally, the controversial part.
It gives fighters genuine choice in how they want to pursue titles without the crushing sanctioning fees that drain purses today.
Sanctioning fees are an issue, but crushing, I don't know about all that.
It gives the fighters a choice. Mr. Chairman, professional boxers put their health and their future on the line every single time they step through the ropes. H.R. 4624 says that their safety, their basic dignity, and their ability to pay a medical bill are not negotiable. California regulates more combat sports events than any other state in the country by a wide margin. And we are proud to stand with Congressman Jack and Congresswoman Davids, who is also a fighter, and the other members of Congress to support this bipartisan bill. Please pass this bill, add the inflation adjustment, and give American boxers the protection that they've earned in blood and sweat.
Notice he spent all that time explaining what nobody would disagree with and nobody would be against, or very few people would be against, and then spent very little time, 1-2 sentences about the UBO, which is why folks are skeptical about the bill. That's enough about the medical coverage and the fighter pay. We don't disagree.
Thank you, and I'm happy to answer your question.
Mr. English, thank you so much for joining us. Can you briefly remind us of what the world of boxing looked like before the Ali Act and what were the conditions and practices that led to the Ali Act?
Repeating, in my view, it was thoroughly corrupt. Ratings were sold. We know that as a fact because there was a conviction.
So I believe it was 1998 the FBI ran a sting operation on the IBF and caught them taking bribes for rankings. The documentary's on YouTube somewhere. I'll probably link it here.
Let me ask you this. If the Revival Act was passed, would Unified Boxing Organization, or UBOs, be allowed to undertake any of the practices that the Ali Act prohibited?
Yes. One major one is the coziness, I use that word, between managers and the UBO. Whether it's the UFC, Zuffa, or anybody else who may come along. Nobody else exists right now. And I have seen provisions of contracts that require the signing with a, quote, advisor, unquote, for 15% of a boxer's income. It was in a promotional contract. So, and that was an entity that was a Zuffa-related entity.
This wasn't completely coherent, but I believe he's trying to describe a conflict of interest where Zuffa or a UBO would determine the fighter's purse, of course, keeping whatever is left, but they're also in bed with an advisor that takes another 15% cut from the purse. I could be wrong, but that's what I gathered.
Now that's absolutely prohibited. Now I don't know whether that contract was provisioned on the completion of this bill, but it's there.
Yeah.
That is, I don't know why, but it's there.
Thank you. Mr. Epstein, the UFC settled a long-standing antitrust case after allegations of using restrictive contracts, keeping fighters' pay at roughly 15 to 20% of revenue, as Mr. English was kind of alluding to. What minimum share of event revenues can you commit today that boxers could receive under Zuffa Boxing League?
While I don't believe that's what Mr. English was alluding to, that's a hell of a question from Representative Omar and will be my main concern with any league formed as an athlete or manager. The NBA athletes receive 49 to 51% of basketball-related income. NFL athletes receive 48% of league revenue. In contrast, UFC athletes were making 15 to 20% of revenue and sued because of it.
Yeah, first let me just address, sort of the lawsuit, which is part of your question. We did settle the lawsuit. It was 10 years of litigation. We made a business decision to settle it. But I want to be clear, there was no finding of any liability or anything along those lines.
No finding of liability is one of the main reasons you settled.
As far as committing to any percentage today, obviously can't do that.
Not a good look at all. At least tell us you won't repeat the same bullshit.
We're starting a new business. If this legislation is passed, we're going to be starting a new business, and it's going to be a startup.
Okay, well then let me ask you this: UFC is being sued again.
Got your ass. I'm glad she didn't let him get away with that.
Not only with more claims of wage suppression, but also new allegations of discovery violation, even though you just said there was no discovery, possibly withholding a substantial amount of evidence that was crucial to the UFC's bid for force their antitrust claims into arbitration. With all these lawsuits, I'm having a hard time seeing why any of the fighters would ever be able to trust that they will be paid fairly in the system.
Me too.
So, Mr. Epstein, what would you tell the many boxers who are worried about being trapped in a long coercive contract, or how will you make sure that the economic freedom of boxers will not be taken away under this model that you're advocating for?
What I would tell them is they're going to have a choice. What's very clear from this legislation is that the existing Ali Act is not going to change at all.
So then what are we here for? Oh, the existing Ali Act will remain the same for the current system. However, the provisions only allow for the UBOs to violate it. Got it.
We're adding new provisions that will add for, we've talked about, the Unified Boxing Organizations, or UBOs. There's going to be a choice for athletes to make. I don't see how choice is a bad thing. If our system is not providing the economic opportunities for athletes, they can avail themselves to the existing system.
Well, the choice is a fork in the road, and the options are one highway that was built a long time ago and one newly constructed highway that nobody has been on. If I'm the athlete, I need plenty of exit ramps. In other words, I can't have a contract that prohibits me from changing my mind. I want contracts with time limits as opposed to contracts owing a specific number of fights in which the UBO would control, so I can't be sat on a bench.
But the problem we've got is the current state of boxing is just a disaster. As was mentioned in previous testimony from witnesses on this panel, there are no major media companies in the United States of America that currently broadcast in any way, shape, or form a consistent cadence of boxing events.
That's true. All the major media companies have bailed in the United States, but only if you don't count streaming platforms like Amazon Prime or Netflix. He did say consistent cadence of boxing events. We do have Pro Box, which has been fairly consistent, but currently streams live on YouTube. But Mr. Epstein is a UFC lawyer. I want to hear existing boxing promoters and managers' opinion on whether they think the current state of boxing is a disaster or not.
If we look back 10 or 15 years ago, you had HBO, you had Showtime, you had ESPN Friday Night Fights, which I loved, Tuesday Night Fights on USA. I mean, I'm a huge boxing fan too. I want this sport to be successful. I want it to win, and I really do believe that the UBOs will give it a chance.
I'm unfamiliar with all the ways we would be able to watch Zuffa boxing. I believe they have a streaming platform, UFC Fight Pass. Is he saying that Zuffa will go the network route, or are we talking about more streaming platforms? Not sure.
But ultimately, it's going to be a choice for athletes. If they don't like it, they can choose to stick with the existing system.
Again, if I'm a smart fighter, I want to know the revenue share and how the contracts are structured. I want the contract to be based on time as opposed to the number of fights. And I don't want non-compete clauses that mean I can't go take a better opportunity. If I'm one of the first to sign, I only want it to be a maximum 2-3 years. Without knowing this information, the UBO route isn't an option.
Your written testimony also says the current mega event model in boxing financially benefits a few boxers at the top. How would the creation of a UBO organization promote growth for the sport and success spread out among the boxers a little bit more?
Yeah, I think the model really is what we've done at the UFC. You know, we purchased the UFC in 2001. We were doing a handful of events, 4 or 5 events per year. In 2026, we'll do 43 events. Typically, that's 12 to 14 bouts per event. So that's, you know, essentially 24 to 28 athletes competing. This is the type of stuff that we're going to do in the world of boxing. We're increase capacity. We're going to not just create opportunities for 1 or 2 boxers every few years to do a mega fight, but create a consistent cadence of events, which of course means a consistent cadence of work for a huge number of boxers. As I mentioned at UFC, we're 750 athletes currently, plus or minus a few. This is the type of aspirations that certainly we have for the boxing industry. And that means, as I said, not just more athletes making more money on a per round basis, but actually more athletes making money in general.
There's more pro boxers in one weight class than there's fighters in the entire UFC. How many boxers are we talking about in one UBO, and how many fight dates are we talking about? And again, every time he talks about boxing, I'd love to hear a promoter or manager giving their testimony as well.
You discuss how the current 4-belt system has created a self-serving incentive to emphasize the ranking of a few boxers at the top at the expense of competitive, entertaining matches that could grow the sport. Can you discuss how this bill would foster healthy competition in boxing?
So to answer your question, sir, you have to understand the way that boxing works, the current system, the 4-belt system. So what you have is you have a promoter who signs a fighter, and that's the promoter's fighter. And then this is early in their career. And so what happens is you look for that promoter will promote a fight and look for somebody that person can beat. Okay, has to be good enough to pass my approval or whichever state's approval, but has to be reasonable but beatable. Okay, and those people in boxing are called opponents. That's the term that we use.
Right. That's also how it worked in a one-belt system. Yes, promoters sign prospects that they think have potential to be good fighters. At the start of that fighter's career, the promoter finds them opponents that they are likely to be. The main reason is because the typical feeder system for these prospects is amateur boxing. Amateurs are significantly different than the pros, so the prospect needs time to develop new skills they'll need to succeed, as well as transition from a higher paced 3 rounds in the amateurs to gradually working up to 12 rounds at the championship level in the pros.
And then when you get a really good opponent, they're called the gatekeeper, okay? And we have some of them in the various weight classes, and then they move up. And so this goes on and on and on until you get an undefeated fighter.
Or that doesn't work and they lose along the way.
Okay, this is what's happening. And then over here on the other side of the country or nearby, you have another promoter doing essentially the same thing, okay? And they're doing this. Now, all these people that have been beat all the time, they're attracting just loss after loss after loss, and they've got really no kind of recourse. They've got no promoter. They're not being promoted, but the undefeated fighter is. Now, at the end of this rainbow, all this way up, the sanctioning bodies have issued like the regional belt, the this and that belt, whatever belt. They have a lot of belts. Let me give you, sir. In 1996, when the Professional Boxing Act was passed, 619 titles were issued across the world by the sanctioning organizations. Last year, that number was 2,156.
Yes, I agree there's a problem with too many belts in boxing, but I don't see that connection.
Okay, so you saw an increase in the number of titles. It's good for like the fighters like to have them and the whole thing, but they're charging every time the thing they charge for the belt. That system that I just explained to you is exploitive in a way.
In which way? Because of the sanctioning fees for the baby belts, or is it the opponents that are meant to lose, or both?
Now, under a UBO system, if a promoter has both sides of the card, their financial interest shifts. Their business model shifts from wanting to make sure that their fighter wins to making a competitive match that the public will want to see, because it's driven by, it's a different model. So you want to have like a fight that people will want to tune in and see.
Not necessarily. If a promoter has both sides of a card, the financial interest doesn't necessarily shift. There's unlikely to be 2 fighters that draw the same interest from fans, so the more popular or bigger ticket seller winning could still be in the promoter's best interest regardless, because if the less popular fighter wins, it doesn't automatically mean they become as popular.
The first model is like, well, you've got a fight that's like kind of okay, people might tune in, but you're searching for the mega fight at the end where you have like a big champion that's won all this stuff versus the other promoter's big champion, and you promote a big thing. They're just different business models. But when the focus shifts from trying to protect your fighter and getting the opponent beat to making competitive matches, in my view, that would be good for boxing.
This is pretty out of touch with modern boxing, and one of the many complaints that boxing fans already had. Boxing promoters most certainly have both sides of a card often. We call it keeping fights and belts in-house. Turkey recently coming into the sport opening doors for the big cross-promotional fights.
And one final caveat to that goes along with it. Let's say you've got one of these fighters that are promoted and they take a loss. Okay, their earnings potential just plummets the next go-round, like the next fight. It just goes so far down. Whereas under a system where they've got both sides of the card, if the guy loses, so what? They've got a contract. They know what they're going to get the next time.
Many of the exact same boxers he's alluding to also have contracts and get specific amounts for each fight.
This is what's happening in boxing, and I think that adding a UBO model, not taking away the current system, because remember, there's a difference here, sir. This is for U.S. boxers. This is for American boxers, okay? These sanctioning organizations deal throughout the world, so we're dealing with world titles. And this is for American, and I think that the name of the bill, the Revival Act, the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act, I believe it will revive American boxing by providing competition for our fighters. Okay. Hope that answers your question.
put it all together, and it sounds like he's saying UBOs would match undeveloped prospects tough from the beginning of their careers. So instead of having those opponents he spoke about getting thrown to the wolves, UBOs throw everybody into the fire immediately. Seems to me that UBOs would really have to pick and choose who they sign for it not to turn out the same results as the latter. Also, styles make fights in boxing, and if you could match equals, that doesn't necessarily mean the majority will find it entertaining.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a few questions for Mr. English. I spent more than 10 years of my life in the casino business, and boxing was an important part of driving that business since I entered it back in the early 2000s. I want to talk about how boxing has grown or declined over time. Would you say there are more cards today, more or fewer cards today than there were 10 years ago?
Well, it's a misnomer that there are substantially fewer. I got the research and I provided it to the staff. It would take more time than it's worth, but it's not hugely lower.
Well, actually it is. In the 1990s, there were 250 to 300. I used to do this for a living. And actually in the 2020s, there's about 100 to 130. So we've seen about a 50% decline in U.S. cards over time.
Actually, he doesn't know that. First, he asked about 10 years ago, then rebutted with info about boxing cards from 20 years ago. I have no idea what numbers he's quoting, but there's no way he's accurately accounting for all pro boxing cards in America, which he should have been given this context. There's no data set that has combined all cards in the U.S., but just looking at state athletic commissions' event calendars disproves his numbers. I looked at 5 big states and got over 100, with each of them sanctioning around 20 to 30 pro boxing cards in a given year.
So, but it is your contention, so I understand, that the boxing industry, if you will, the opportunities available for boxers today is the same as it was in the 70s, 80s, 90s. It's just as good. The industry
it's not the same.
It's not. The opportunities are the same, better or worse today than they were 20, 30 years ago.
Very different. I can't judge whether the fact, look, if Mr. Ali was a world champion today, and I always say this, how goes the heavyweight division, goes boxing. It's true. We don't have, right now, the prominent, and I'm speaking generally, of course, we don't have the prominent American boxers that we once did.
Sure, and perhaps it's because the number of opportunities available to become that are smaller.
Mr. English is trying to say that the lack of prominent American heavyweight boxers reduces interest in American boxing as a whole, which is an opinion shared by many boxing enthusiasts. Representative Fine contends that perhaps we don't have the prominent heavyweight boxer because of a lack of opportunity based on the objectively false figures he just quoted.
So my next question for you is this. Do you think if we created a second vehicle, UFC's been extraordinarily successful, created an industry out of nothing.
The UFC isn't a second vehicle. You just said they created something out of nothing.
Do you think that if it was created, that what we're talking about here, would there be more or less opportunities for boxers to engage in the sport and the profession that they want to participate in?
If I had a second YouTube channel, would there be more or less places for you to consume my content? What type of question is that?
More or fewer?
Just to be very clear, I'm not arguing that there should not be a UBO, or what do you ever want to call it. What I'm arguing is that the guardrails that are in the Muhammad Ali Act should apply universally.
Okay, so let's talk about guardrails. Earlier this week, Terrence Bud Crawford was stripped of his championship belt by a sanctioning organization because he didn't pay an exorbitant fee to the sanctioning organization. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
And so there are pretty big problems with what goes on today.
A fighter getting his money and not paying a sanctioning body is far different from a fighter not getting what he's worth.
Many times I have suggested to fighters that they do not need a particular belt or any belt. I could give you the names of the fighters. It's not important. Sometimes fighters transcend those belts.
But you also said there's not a lot transcending right now. We don't have a lot of transcenders right now. There aren't.
We don't have as many as we did. I can think of a handful.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were involved actually in an Ali Act case involving Jeff Lacey versus your clients. You worked with this group called Main Events, it was sort of involved in this space. When was the last time Main Events promoted a televised card?
How is that relevant?
Because, I'm focused on opportunities for boxers. Was it a year ago, 5 years, 10 years?
I am not here as representative of Main Events. I want to make it very clear.
No, I understand. I'm asking
But I do want
a fact question.
They've got a card that they're co-promoting in January.
But when's the last time before that?
It was in Florida last year. Or
Okay, so
maybe early this year.
couple opportunities.
There's hundreds, if not thousands, of promotional companies. How many cards that one of them had is irrelevant.
Look, the fact of the matter is this. In the 1980s, the 1990s, boxing was considered one of the big three sports. There were massive opportunities available for people who want to participate, and it was not only good for them, but it was good for the facilities, the entertainment venues, for the business that I came from. Everybody won by these increased opportunities. That industry is now in decline. And I think that we can oppose a bill like this because we want to keep the equivalent of the horse and buggy system of boxing going and watch it continue to decline, watch it continue to create fewer and fewer opportunities for boxers, or we can live in the world the way it is today. And what we've seen is UFC has taken over several decades something that basically didn't exist and turned it into something extraordinary. I think we would all benefit. I think boxers would benefit if they had access to that same kind of opportunity too. So I'm very grateful to Representative Jack for bringing this bill forward, and I'm going to be excited to vote for it if and when it comes before us for markup.
Of course, unless it leads into the same exact lawsuits.
What does the UBO do that they don't do them?
Well, the UBO would essentially be the promoter, and that's kind of the big difference is the UBO would be ranking their own fighters.
The conflicts of interest that we've been talking about.
That have both sides of the card.
Does the bill anticipate a specific organization to be a UBO, and can others qualify?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's going to be...
Absolutely what?
I think that absolutely there will be multiple UBOs in a short amount of time if this bill were to pass. I would think of 3 or 4 would pop up within 3 or 4 years of this bill passing, because it will take a little bit of time to get going, but at least 3 or 4.
I highly, highly doubt that. Plus, that just fractures the boxing landscape even more. We won't be able to see fights we want to see because they belong to different UBOs.
So I do recommend that before this bill moves any further, that my colleagues take a moment and check in with the people who will actually feel the impact of these reforms. Talk to your state athletic commission, your local boxing gym, the small venues, and mostly talk to boxers in your community. We should hear all perspectives and make sure that we are making fully informed policy decision that truly helps workers and small businesses around sports. I welcome future bipartisan discussions on how to best serve boxers and improve the boxing industry. Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent to enter into the record.
Without objection.
An op-ed by Oscar De La Hoya and Evander Holyfield opposing H.R. 4624, a tweet by Nico Ali Walsh opposing the bill, an interview with a promoter, Bob Uram, expressing opposition to the bill, and a letter from Mr. Uram, an open letter to the Campat sports community and Congress opposing the Revival Act, a letter from MMA Fighters Association opposing the bill, a letter from Carlos de Ronin Newton, a member of the MMA Fighters Association, a letter from Sarah McMahon, a 2004 Olympic silver medalist in wrestling, former UFC contender, and now owner of a martial arts gym, also opposing the Revival Act. I would also like to enter data from BoxRec about the number of fights and boxing events in recent years.
Damn, looks like Dana White's got a long way to go.